Chief of Army Staff, General Anil Chauhan, officers from the three services, veterans, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. Let me start by quoting the very person who has inspired this dialogue and given a name to it, Chanakya. He says, Kalo hi Duritrikram. It's a part of a larger shloka which highlights the importance of time. It translates into time is insurmountable and unpredictable. Let me juxtapose this along with Clausewitz saying, one of the foremost strategic thinkers on warfare. And he says that warfare is the realm of uncertainty. Both these lines signify a significant recognition that time, in its relentless advance, dissolves prediction itself. It means predicting the future is always difficult. As practitioners of warfare, we all know that predicting warfare or the outcome of war is always difficult, from the smallest of engagement to a war or a campaign. Let me also tell you that this is a very, very difficult thing because warfare invents itself constantly. Concepts that appear futuristic can become obsolete even before they're getting implemented. Yet, this is the risk that all military officers have to undertake. The ability to visualize, anticipate, and prepare for future conflicts, therefore, becomes existential for all of us, and it's not an option. And that's because, let me also say that the profession of arms is slightly different from other professions. In other professions, you actually practice your profession on a daily basis. If you're a lawyer, you're practicing law at the bar. If you're a surgeon, you're practicing on an operation table. You're an architect, engineer, you're practicing. Soldiers don't fight every day. They actually prepare for that ultimate day. And yet, they're not supposed to fail on that ultimate day because any failure in warfare can be catastrophic for a nation. So this is important for us. So preparation, a clarity of thought, and intellectual honesty are the lifeblood of strategic leadership. Military leadership must take lessons from past and present to prepare for the future. Sun Tzu had said that if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the outcome of hundreds of battles. When he spoke about knowing about the enemy and knowing about yourself, he was actually talking in the context before the warfare. But I think knowing the enemy and knowing yourself in the context when the warfare is already on, that is, I think, becoming more and more important. And probably in future, in a battle, not allowing the enemy to know about himself will become a battle-winning factor. That, I think, will be important. One thing, however, is certain in history that tells us that commanders who have won wars and battles, they have done so by ingenious application of strategy. Again and again, Sanskrit verse which says that yuktaya sarbhe sambhavati. That is, by strategy, everything is possible. Strategy has been long recognized an art of the jungle. It's part of warfare. And this actually correctly translates into Hindi as Raniti, which actually signifies its meaning. Otherwise, strategy today has been used in the wider context. It can be used even for business, marketing, even electoral politics. But when we talk about strategy in its original sense, it's the logic of warfare and art for preparing and application of military power that is Raniti, and that's expected out of military leaders like all of us. Historically speaking, strategy has been largely shaped by geography. The simplest of military appreciation actually commences with the analysis of terrain. Of course, thereafter it's followed by analysis of relative strength and then time and space, these kind of factors. Lay of ground, its trafficability, obstacles, their potential intervisibility of terrain, that influence what kind of a tactics you are going to employ in battlefield. Geography and terrain have influenced and decided the outcome of most of the battles which have been fought in the past. But today, what's happening is technology is making that particular geography slightly irrelevant. You just had to look at this revolution in military affairs when we talk about the first revolution in military affairs, which is about maneuver warfare. When you talk about maneuver, geography is important into it. When you talk about the second revolution in military affairs, it's about net-centric warfare. There's no geography into it. So technology is making geography a bit irrelevant. What I'll do is I'll talk about three trends which are going to shape warfare in future. First is technological trends, then is about geopolitical trends, and then, of course, the application of this in military, how military's strategy, etc., is transforming. So history reminds us that, that technological asymmetry has always shaped outcomes. I just spoke about how technology is replacing geography in application of strategy. Technology is going to be one of the most defining factors of future war. We stand at the cusp of what I have been calling as the third revolution in military affairs, and that's about convergence, in which a number of technologies are converging together to define a war-winning kind of a strategy. It's a convergence between kinetic and non-kinetic, contact and non-contact warfare. These are actually the differences between all these are feeding. Integrated networks, automation, robotics, and cognitive tools now shape the tempo and outcomes of combat. And if we have to, there are a number of technologies which are actually shaping the outcome of war. But I have tried to shortlist about 4 trends which are going to shape based on technology. First, as called is a celerity, which I've spoken about it actually a number of seminars. Celerity is about speed and velocity. So unprecedented advances in stealth, precision, long range, variations in speed, right from a very slow-moving drone to hypersonics. So all this is going to transform warfare because it's very, very difficult then to target such kind of targets. Second, I think, is robotics and automation. So robotics may dominate our daily lives in future, and it's going to dominate even warfare. And in robotics, when we talk about man and unmanned teaming, MUMT, that's, I think, important. That is, it's also a man and machine mix, which is going to influence warfare. Exoskeletal is an example of this. And of course, finally, it is the laws, that's the lethal and autonomous weapons. Third trend is battlefield transparency. That is because of unprecedented advances in the number and the nature of sensors which we are producing. So we have sensors today which are electro-optical, SAR, IR, magnetic, seismic, acoustic, chemical. These are all much more which nature has given us. Nature has just given us about 5 kind of sensors. And in numbers also, the number of sensors which we employ today are phenomenal. I mean, they're just much more than what the nature has given us. You know, we may be 8 billion people, 16 billion eyes actually. That's the amount of sensors. But the amount of optical sensors we're deploying all on your mobile phones, cameras over here, cameras when you go outside on roads, and then through satellites and UAVs, the phenomenal number of, they almost match with each other. So these are technological trends which are going to shape warfare. And of course, there are geopolitical trends that give rise to war. And warfare, if you all know, that's a continuation of politics by other means. It defines the type of war, the duration, the nature of force, combatant, and the strategy. The geopolitics decides that. Let me start by, when this all started changing was first is this Treaty of Westphalia, which introduced this concept of nation state, and along with it came the concepts of sovereignty, territorial integrity, defined borders of a state. Post Westphalian nation states were ruled mostly by monarchs, but the French Revolution changed all that. And thereafter, common citizens, when nations became republics, common citizens were participants in deciding the future of a state and also warfare. So thereafter, these all were studied by Clausewitz, and that's the foundation of actually modern warfare. And but all these Napoleonic wars actually were land-centric. And thereafter, they evolved into maritime domain and air domain. And it is when we started operating in these domains, then this concept of sovereignty and territorial integrity started taking a backseat. So in maritime domain, you talk about continental shelf, territorial waters, and you can actually go into territorial waters for the other countries. So over here, the sovereignty is absolute in land, but slightly ambiguous in the maritime domain, and so it is in the air domain. But look at the new domains of warfare, like cyber, space, cognitive domain. They all challenge the absolute concept of borders, territorial integrity, even citizenship belonging to a state, and their loyalties, etc. This all changes. So sovereignty has become functionally porous. Nation states today are reinterpreting boundaries, asserting new claims, and reopening issues that have long been considered as settled. These conceptual trends manifest in politics and wars, like what we are witnessing in Eastern Europe. And today, when we're talking about peace talks, it's about redefining of borders over there. In West Asia, we see the similar kind of things. And even claims over sovereign territories of other nations like Greenland are actually all a manifestation of this particular trend, that's a dilution of sovereignty. The next geopolitical trend, which I see, is a diminishing utility of conventional deterrence. Now, this particular trend is slightly paradoxical. On one hand, technology has introduced weapons of mass destruction, and they're far more destructive. This should actually increase deterrence. But what we find today are 3 or 4 trends which actually are paradoxical in nature. What we see is an increased propensity of nations to use force for attainment of political objectives. We see that every day. We see undeclared wars, informal wars. They are becoming more popular. And some of them are getting manifested into form of subconventional operation, terrorism to gray zone warfare. So that's another trend. Third, I think, is democratization of some technologies. Even non-state actors today possess long-range, precision strike weapons, cyber, drones, etc., lot of ammunition. And so there may not be any large-scale world wars, but a number of small duration conflicts, a number of conflicts in 2025 is actually is an indication of this particular trend. So conventional deterrence today is taking on a new form, adding to the complexity of the task that the military has to carry out. The battle space, the tactics, techniques, procedures, and the rules of engagement are all changing and changing rather fast. The third trend, which I would like to highlight, is the strategic domain that lies in the area of nuclear deterrence and proliferation. By the late Cold War, nuclear deterrence had reached a stage of tense but a stable kind of an equilibrium. Arms control agreements such as SALT, START, and Non-Proliferation Treaty showed spread of nuclear weapons, while improved communication between the superpowers reduced the risk of miscalculation. After the Soviet Union collapsed, global stockpiles declined, and many believed that the world was moving gradually towards global disarmament. Today, however, this particular stability is weakening. Major powers are modernizing their arsenals, long-standing treaties have eroded, and regional tensions from South Asia to Korean Peninsula are driving new nuclear ambitions. Some states now signal the acceptability of nuclear weapons. This thin boundary between rhetoric and demonstration of actual capability is causing instability in the global nuclear domain. So Russia's pursuit of nuclear-powered systems such as Burevestnik or say even Poseidon, China's expansion of its nuclear arsenal, and President Trump's call for nuclear testing are some case in point towards this weakening of this particular part. To summarize the geopolitical trends, erosion of concept of sovereignty and territorial integrity that's being challenged, propensity to use force for attainment of political objectives, that's the second trend, and the third is dilution of nuclear trends. If you combine all these 3 trends, this doesn't augur well for global peace and security. So global geopolitics itself is in a kind of a state of flux with shifting alliances and security interdependencies. The future world could hence be more violent and a very, very unstable place. And the militaries of nations have to be prepared for this particular eventuality. The technology and geopolitical trends will influence warfare. Essentially, this addresses the question of why and how wars take place. So Indian armed forces have to think of new trends to define new concepts, doctrines, and strategies to take care of these 2 trends which I just spoke about. And they must therefore be ready to operate in an environment where rules of engagement are either non-existent or complex, or there are no rules of engagement at all. Thresholds are intentionally ambiguous, and adversaries exploit legal, cognitive, and technological gaps. To prevail, we must create capabilities the adversaries can't counter or do not expect. This is the essence of asymmetry. In the terms of operational concepts, there are many trends. I'll just talk about a few trends which come to my mind. You see, the first I'll talk about wherever actually humans have used technology for improving their daily life or daily routine, work, travel, business, communication, becomes actually a new domain for warfare. The more we use a domain or a technology, the more lucrative it becomes to deny it to you by war or by use of force. This will lead to expansion of multi-domain operations, and the domains are going to expand as human beings get used to more and more technologies and more domains. Call it a natural progression or a law of inevitability. But multi-domain operations will expand in new domains that become part of human life, cyber, media, etc. Warfare is no longer confined to land, sea, or air. It will be conducted simultaneously across all these domains which I'm talking about, which we've identified. And of course, they'll keep emerging as we get used to new domains and new technologies in the future. The second trend which I notice is non-linearity and the expansion of battle space. Non-linearity had existed in the past also, but today it's acquiring a new kind of meaning with the spatial enlargement of battle space. The old notions of front, intermediate, and depth have completely collapsed. Almost the entire national space, its infrastructure, networks, economy, information space of the adversary actually lies within the reach of today's modern weapons. And Operation Sindoor was an example of it. The third trend which I notice is to do with offensive maneuver, which I think is going to take a backseat in future warfare. Offensive spirit or offensive element was always part of principles of war, and that will remain. But offensive maneuver is one thing which is going to take a backseat because of advances in what I talked about earlier, precision, because you could detect things. So while maneuver become difficult, offensive spirit will acquire a new meaning. You'll have to define different ways and means of actually putting that offensive strategy into place. The fourth trend is about rise of asymmetry. Wars are actually won by creating asymmetries. And generally, if you see, these asymmetries are created in newer domains. So it's happened in maritime domain. Thereafter, it happened in, say, the air domain. And today, in these new domains, this is where you can actually create asymmetries. So warfare, when it is conducted in an older domain, existing domain, will always be brutal. It will be hard fought. But warfare in a new domain will be smart. So that's the trend which we are saying. And in this, I won't say that the warfare in a new domain will be decisive. It will be decisive depending on the nature of the war which you are actually undertaking. If the nature of war demands, say, territory, then of course it will be brutal. The nature of war, if you want to fight in a new domain, which is short and modern, it will be very smart kind of in warfare. So all this trends actually, military trends, there could be many, I just listed about 4, based on geopolitical trends and technological trends. And this is going to redefine our doctrines, our concepts, and weapon systems and their development. So I finally come to the last part of my address, which is to talk out priorities for India. Military posturing, I think, should rest on 4 important pillars. The first is credible readiness. This means that we must be capable of rapid mobilization and theater synergy. The second pillar is to be proficient in the conducting multi-domain operations by seamlessly integrating land, sea, air, space, and the cognitive domain. The third, I think, is technological leapfrogging or redefining the game instead of playing a catch-up kind of a game. Finally, the armed forces must be part of a resilient national security architecture, which includes secure supply chains, energy resilience, and ingenious defense. At the strategic posturing, we must be dependent on military preparedness of the highest order, and we must take into account the new normal, which we've been talking about. That's important. Innovation and defense, research and development and manufacturing is the second pillar, Atmanirbharta and diplomatic nimbleness. Strategic posturing actually will have to be based on pillars of strength. That is, again, I'll try and conclude by another Sanskrit shloka, which actually says, Shaktir Balsaya Mulam. That means that the power is the root of all strength. Military power shapes perceptions. It signals unprecedented cost to the adversary and lends credibility to national resolve. Military power and its over-demonstration will become hence more and more relevant in future. That's all I had to share with you. Thank you for such a patient hearing. Jai Hind.